Not failure, not disaster, not some giant moment where your whole life explodes. Most regret looks normal. That is why it wins. It looks like telling yourself, "I'll deal with it after things calm down." It looks like ignoring the back pain because work is crazy. It looks like checking your bank account, feeling that little drop in your stomach, then closing the app like you never saw it. It looks like saying, "Yeah, we should catch up soon," to someone you genuinely care about, while quietly knowing you probably won't make it happen. It looks like staying in a job that drains you because leaving feels complicated. It looks like promising yourself you'll start next Monday, then next month, then next year, and then one day you look up and realize the things you kept postponing did not stay small. They got heavier. Your body feels heavier. Your money feels tighter. Your relationships feel thinner. Your job feels less secure. Your confidence feels weaker. And the worst part? A lot of it could have been fixed years ago. When it was cheaper. When it was easier. When it only needed effort, not repair. That is what this video is about. The 7 things most people regret not fixing before 40. Not fake self-help, not vague motivation, the real things, the slow problems. The ones that quietly decide whether your 40s feel like stability or damage control. And here's the part most people miss. The biggest regrets usually don't come from one huge mistake. They come from years of delay, years of saying, "It's not that bad." Years of choosing comfort over clarity. Years of letting obvious problems survive because they were still small enough to ignore. So stay with me, because one of these 7 is probably costing you more than you think. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly which one it is, and what to do before it gets more expensive. Most people think regret is dramatic. One wrong relationship, one dumb investment, one bad job move, one terrible decision, one moment that changed everything. But that's not how regret usually works in adult life. Regret is repetition. It is delayed honesty. It is knowing something is wrong and still letting it ride, because dealing with it feels inconvenient. That's the real danger, because adults are incredibly good at living with low-grade dysfunction. You can function while being exhausted. You can function while being broke in disguise. You can function while drifting in your career. You can function while your relationships are slowly cooling. You can function while your life is becoming harder in ways that still don't look dramatic enough to scare you. That's the trap. You don't panic, you adapt. And adaptation is useful until you start adapting to the wrong things. That's when years disappear. That's when regret gets built. Not in one moment. In tolerated patterns. That's why this matters before 40. Because before 40, a lot of things are still highly fixable. Your body still responds, your income can still jump, your habits can still be rebuilt, your relationships can still be repaired before distance becomes identity. Your future still has enough runway to reward serious effort. After 40, plenty of things are still fixable too. But now the cost rises. More discipline, more energy, more money, more emotional pain. That's the real message here. Not panic, not shame. Urgency. Useful urgency. Because there is a huge difference between saying, "I know I should fix that," and saying, "I understand what this becomes if I don't." That second sentence changes behavior. It changes how you look at time. It changes how you treat delay. It changes how honest you're willing to be with yourself. So as we go through these 7, don't just listen passively. Don't just nod and say, "Yeah, that makes sense." Ask yourself one brutal question. If I leave this exactly the way it is for another 5 years, what will it cost me? That's the question people avoid. And that's exactly why regret keeps collecting interest. Let's give this a face. We'll call him Daniel. Daniel is 39. From the outside, he looks fine. He has a job. He pays bills. He is not reckless. He is not some obvious failure. He is exactly the kind of person people describe with one dangerous word: fine. And that's the problem. Because fine can hide a lot. Daniel wakes up tired more often than he admits. He has been saying he needs to get back into shape for almost 3 years. He makes decent money, but somehow still doesn't feel safe. He has some savings, but not enough to stop worrying. At work, he is respected enough to stay, but not valued enough to feel secure. He has people in his life, but not enough closeness to feel deeply connected. Nothing in his life looks bad enough to justify the level of quiet panic he feels. That's what confuses him. If he had ruined his life with one giant mistake, at least the story would make sense. But he didn't. He just postponed things. Health, money, hard conversations, career growth, boundaries, direction, discipline. He kept telling himself he'd get serious later. Later when work slowed down. Later when he felt less tired. Later when life was less messy. Later when he had more clarity. And because each problem stayed small for a while, nothing felt urgent enough to force change. That's how adults get trapped. Not through chaos, through tolerated drift. Daniel didn't blow up his life. He just let it become more expensive, more tiring, and less intentional than it should have been. And that is what this video is really about. The quiet problems that compound in the background while you stay busy calling it normal. So let's start with the first one. The one many people feel in their body before they understand anything else is wrong. The first thing people regret not fixing before 40 is their health. And not because they wish they had looked hotter in photos. That's shallow. The real regret is capacity, energy, mobility, focus, recovery, the ability to trust your own body. That's what people miss when they're younger. They think bad health means extreme illness. It usually doesn't. It usually starts smaller. Sleep gets worse. Stress gets normal. Movement drops. Food becomes comfort. Pain becomes background noise. Energy gets replaced by caffeine. At first, none of it feels serious. That's why people delay it, because the body is generous early. It compensates. It absorbs abuse. It lets you pretend. But it does not do that forever. Daniel didn't get some huge health scare. That's not how it hit him. He stood up from his desk one day and felt pain in his lower back, sharp enough to stop him. Not hospital-level pain. Just enough to make him feel old. That bothered him more than the pain itself. A few days later, he saw a candid photo of himself at dinner. He didn't hate how he looked. He just looked tired, drained, like someone carrying too much low-grade damage. That's when it clicked. He had been treating health like a cosmetic issue. Something optional. Something he would fix later. But the truth was simpler. His body had become a storage unit for postponed decisions. That's what people regret. Not that they weren't perfect. That they knew something was off and kept waiting for a bigger reason to care. Health neglect gets expensive because it leaks into everything. You're more irritable, more tired, more impulsive, less patient, less disciplined. Even money gets harder when your body feels bad. Bad sleep makes bad decisions. Low energy kills consistency. Stress eating destroys control. A body that feels weak makes life feel heavier. And here's the ugly part. Once your body starts feeling unreliable, your confidence changes too. You stop trusting your energy. You stop trusting your follow-through. You stop trusting that you can handle stress well. That changes how you work, how you show up in relationships, how you lead, how you think. That's why people in their late 30s often say something like, "I didn't realize how bad I felt until I started feeling better." That line matters because it means they adapted to dysfunction so long they forgot what normal felt like. That is a brutal thing to realize late. And here's the deeper truth. Health doesn't just determine how long you live. It affects how much of your life you can actually show up for. How much patience you have. How stable your mood is. How willing you are to do hard things. How available you are to the people who matter. That's why people regret delay here so deeply. They don't regret missing perfection. They regret disrespecting the problem while it was still cheap. The second thing people regret not fixing before 40 is money. Not just debt. Not just investing! Their relationship with money. Because a lot of adults are not financially reckless. They are financially vague. And vague money creates anxious lives. Daniel wasn't stupid with money. That's what made it dangerous. He wasn't gambling. He wasn't buying designer nonsense every weekend. He was just normal. He earned more over time, spent more over time, saved sometimes, ignored things when it got uncomfortable, upgraded his life every time income rose. Told himself he was probably okay because he wasn't a disaster. That's how many adults get trapped. They confuse not terrible with secure. Those are not the same thing. You can have decent income and weak systems. You can have nice things and no real cushion. You can look successful and still feel exposed. And exposed people live differently. They stay in jobs they hate. They delay risks. They panic faster. They tolerate more than they should. They don't have breathing room. That's what money really buys at this stage of life, not luxury. Breathing room. Silence in the nervous system. The silence of knowing an unexpected bill won't crush you. The silence of knowing you can leave a bad job. The silence of not feeling one paycheck away from chaos. That's what many adults actually want. And the regret is not always, "I wish I was rich." It's more often, "I wish I had stopped drifting with money sooner." Because money avoidance compounds quietly. High-interest debt lingers. Retirement delay becomes normal. Lifestyle creep hardens. Emergency savings never quite happens. Then suddenly you are almost 40 and the math starts feeling personal. At 24, no retirement plan feels abstract. At 39, it feels like a mirror. You start asking, what exactly was I waiting for? That question hurts, especially because most people already know the basics. Spend less than you earn. Kill expensive debt. Build a cushion. Automate investing. Don't inflate your lifestyle every time your income goes up. They know. The issue is not information, it's identity. They never became the kind of person who takes money seriously enough to build freedom. That's why this regret runs so deep. It's not just about numbers. It's about trust. Can you trust yourself to deal with reality early? Can you trust yourself not to look away when the truth is uncomfortable? A lot of adults realize too late that they kept choosing emotional comfort over financial clarity. And that trade gets ugly over time, because vague money doesn't stay vague. Eventually it becomes a constrained life, and constrained lives create desperate decisions. That's why this one hurts. The third regret is career drift. This one is sneaky because it hides inside responsibility. You show up, you do your job, you handle the workload. You stay useful, you survive. That should count, right? Yes, but not as much as people think. Because work is not the same thing as progress. Being busy is not the same thing as becoming valuable. Years passed does not mean leverage increased, And a lot of adults learn that too late. Daniel felt it when a younger coworker got promoted over him. At first he was irritated, then defensive, then honest. The other person wasn't some genius. They just built more strategically. They had a specialty, a sharper value proposition, a reason the market could justify paying them more. Daniel had become reliable. Reliable pays the bills, but reliable without positioning becomes a trap. You are needed enough to stay, but not differentiated enough to rise. That's how career regret gets built. Not by laziness, by drifting. By working hard in directions that don't create enough leverage. And that regret hurts because career is not just about income. It shapes self-respect. It shapes confidence. It shapes how much control you feel over your future. When work feels stagnant, life starts feeling stagnant. The psychology here is brutal. Routine feels safe. A paycheck feels safe. Familiar stress feels safer than uncertain growth. So people stay where they are too long. They postpone learning the stronger skill. They postpone negotiating. They postpone building a network. They postpone defining what they want to be known for. Then, one day, the market moves, the company changes, someone younger gets ahead, and suddenly, their years of stability don't feel safe anymore. They feel passive. That's painful. Because now the regret is not, I didn't work hard. It's, I worked hard without enough direction. That hurts pride. People near 40 start saying things like, I should have specialized earlier. I should have built relationships. I should have left sooner. I should have stopped confusing comfort with growth. That last one matters. A comfortable career can still be a weak trajectory. And trajectory matters more than comfort because it tells you where your effort is actually taking you. That is why people regret not fixing this earlier, because your 30s are often the decade where career leverage can jump hard, but only if you build intentionally. Otherwise, you end up experienced, but underpositioned. And that is a frustrating place to wake up. The fourth regret is relationships, and this one cuts deepest for a lot of people. Because some financial damage can be repaired, some career damage can be rerouted. But relationship damage is more emotionally expensive. Daniel didn't lose people through some giant betrayal. He lost closeness through delay. He postponed hard conversations. He postponed vulnerability. He postponed effort. He postponed repair. He kept assuming love, history, and good intentions would be enough. They weren't. That's one of the hardest truths adults learn. Important relationships do not survive on importance alone. They survive on maintenance, attention, honesty, repair, presence. And when those things are missing, even meaningful relationships start cooling. Not exploding, cooling. That's how regret gets built here, through silence. Distance. Polite versions of closeness replacing the real thing. A friend stops opening up. A partner stops trying to reach you. A parent starts expecting less of you. That hurts because by the time many people notice it, life is already scattering everyone. People are busy. Parents age. Children grow. Friends move. Time tightens. And if you aren't intentional, connection starts living on leftover energy. Leftover energy is rarely enough. That's why adults regret not fixing relationships before 40. Because they eventually understand something brutal. They did not just lose time. They lost windows. Windows to say sorry. Windows to be honest. Windows to show up better. Windows to build depth before life made it harder. And the deeper regret is often not just about others. It's about themselves. The version of themselves that avoided discomfort. Avoided truth. Avoided saying what mattered. Avoided asking for what they needed. That's what hurts. Not just, I lost someone. But I kept acting like time would keep giving me more chances. Sometimes it does. A lot of the time it doesn't. That's why this one stays with people. Because relational neglect leaves emotional echoes that money never can. At this point, the pattern should be obvious. These regrets look different on the surface. Health, money, career, relationships. But underneath them, the same problem keeps showing up. Delayed consequence. That's the real enemy. Human beings react fast to fire. They react poorly to slow decay. If the problem screams, we move. If the problem whispers, we adapt. That's how adults lose years. They adapt to bad sleep. Adapt to weak savings. Adapt to emotional distance. Adapt to job stagnation. Adapt to low standards. Then they call the result regret. But regret is usually not one giant event. It is accumulated avoidance. That is the mindset shift. You do not need to wait for something to become dramatic before you respect it. You just need to ask, if this keeps compounding, what does it become?
That question is stronger than motivation.
Because once you respect the direction of a pattern, you stop negotiating with obvious truths. And the next 3 regrets matter so much because they are often the hidden reasons the first 4 never get fixed. The 5th regret is weak boundaries. And this one is massively underestimated. Because weak boundaries often look like virtue. You look helpful, nice, reliable, easy to work with, low drama. That is why it survives. It gets rewarded. But over time, weak boundaries become self-abandonment. Daniel didn't think of himself as a people pleaser. He thought of himself as mature. But maturity, in his case, often meant swallowing things. Saying yes when he meant no. Taking on extra work to avoid conflict. Letting other people's comfort quietly run his schedule. Delaying hard conversations because he didn't want to disappoint anyone. At first, this made him look dependable. Later, it made him feel invisible inside his own life. That's the danger. Weak boundaries don't just waste time. They blur identity. You stop knowing what you actually want because too much of your life is spent managing reactions. And the older you get, the higher the cost becomes. At 23, weak boundaries waste energy. At 39, they can damage your health, your marriage, your focus, your ambition, and your peace. The psychology underneath this is simple. A lot of people-pleasing is fear. Fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of looking selfish, fear of being misunderstood. So people become strategically agreeable. And that works until life gets too heavy to keep paying the price. Then resentment shows up. And resentment is not random. Resentment usually points to places where you have been betraying yourself. That's why people regret not fixing this earlier. Because eventually they realize they did not just overgive. They underprotected. They built lives around expectations they never consciously agreed to. That realization is rough. Because then regret becomes bigger than lost time. It becomes, I don't know how much of my life I actually chose. That line stings. And it should. Because that is the real cost of weak boundaries. A life that looks functional from the outside, but doesn't fully feel like yours. The 6th regret is lack of direction. And this one ruins people quietly, because it doesn't always feel like failure. Sometimes it feels like efficiency. You know how to get through the week. You handle responsibilities. You stay productive enough. But underneath all that motion, one dangerous question starts growing. What is all this actually adding up to? Daniel felt this most on Sunday nights. Nothing terrible had happened. That was the weird part. Normal weekend, normal errands, normal life. And yet, he felt empty in a way he couldn't explain. Not broken, just unchosen. That feeling matters, because a person can be busy, responsible, even successful, and still be living a life built mostly by default. Default job, default routines, default spending, default goals borrowed from the people around them.
That's where regret gets deep.
Because once enough years pass, the structure becomes real whether the choice behind it was conscious or not. That is why direction matters so much. Direction gives meaning to effort. Without direction, effort leaks everywhere. You work hard but feel disconnected. You stay busy but feel strangely hollow. You keep moving but can't explain where the movement is supposed to lead. That creates a type of exhaustion many people mislabel as laziness. It's not laziness, it's misaligned effort. You are tired because you are carrying a life that does not fit properly. And near 40, this starts hitting harder because time stops feeling infinite. People realize if they keep moving in the same direction, they will actually arrive somewhere.
That's when autopilot becomes frightening.
Because now the question becomes, what if I keep building a life I never consciously chose? That is brutal, but useful. Because once you face that question, you stop obsessing over tiny productivity hacks and start asking bigger ones. What am I actually trying to build? What kind of life makes my effort make sense? What am I calling normal that is really just unexamined? That honesty changes trajectories. And many people regret not demanding it from themselves earlier. The seventh regret is inconsistency. This may be the deepest one because it sits underneath almost everything else. Health needs consistency. Money needs consistency. Career growth needs consistency. Relationships need consistency. Boundaries need consistency. Direction needs repeated action. Without consistency, awareness becomes entertainment. That is where many adults get trapped. They know a lot. They have watched the videos, saved the advice, bought the books, made the plans, started routines, fallen off, started again, fallen off again. And after enough cycles, something dangerous happens. They stop trusting themselves. That loss of self-trust is devastating. Because now every new plan feels heavier. Not because the task is impossible, because the person carrying it is haunted by their own history of quitting. Daniel knew what to do in most areas of his life. That was not the issue. He knew he should walk more. Save more. Drink less. Sleep better. Upgrade his skills. Speak more honestly. Set better boundaries. He knew, but he kept depending on mood. And mood is unstable. That's why waiting for motivation destroys years. Motivation loves beginnings. It hates maintenance. Discipline is different. Discipline is quieter, less exciting, less emotional, but way more useful. Because discipline is really self-reliability. Doing what matters often enough that your future stops depending on how inspired you feel. That's what people regret not learning earlier. Not some extreme grind mindset. Just the ability to keep showing up for what matters without turning every action into a debate. By 40, talent matters less than pattern. The person with average talent and strong consistency usually builds a far better life than the person with huge potential and weak follow-through. That truth hurts, especially smart people. Because smart people often live too long on bursts of ability. Then eventually they realize potential is not the same thing as pattern. And pattern wins. Almost every time. That's why this last regret hits so hard. Because it doesn't just explain one weak area, it explains why so many weak areas survived. So what do you do with all this? First, do not try to fix all 7. That is how people overwhelm themselves and turn clarity into nothing. Pick the one area creating the most downstream damage, the one leaking into everything else. If your health is collapsing, it may be killing your discipline and mood. If your money is unstable, it may be distorting your career and stress. If your boundaries are weak, you may not even have enough energy to fix anything else. So name the most expensive problem, not the most dramatic, the most expensive. Second, make the fix specific. Not "I need to get my life together." That means nothing. Try this instead. I will walk 30 minutes tomorrow morning. I will list every debt and bill tonight. I will cancel the subscriptions I don't use. I will text the person I've been avoiding. I will update my resume this weekend. I will say no to one thing that should never have been yes. Specific action creates momentum. Third, act within 48 hours. That matters, because the space between clarity and action is where most people lose themselves. They feel something real, they imagine change, then they wait, and waiting turns insight into performance. So move, not perfectly, quickly. Fourth, reduce friction. Prepare the workout clothes, automate the savings, send the message before fear grows. Make the habit smaller than your excuses. Stop creating heroic plans for ordinary lives. Ordinary lives need repeatable systems. Finally, stop trying to repair regret with fantasy. You do not need a cinematic comeback. You need stable correction. Boring walks, boring budgeting, boring sleep, boring honesty, boring consistency. That is how solid lives get built. Not through emotional speeches, through repeatable behavior. The final lesson is simple. Most people do not regret what life did to them. They regret what they kept postponing while life was happening. They regret the years they waited to respect their body, the years they waited to control their money, the years they waited to build stronger leverage, the years they waited to tell the truth in relationships, the years they waited to protect their time, the years they waited to choose direction, the years they waited to trust discipline more than emotion. That's what hurts, not imperfection. Delay. Because delay is expensive. And life does not charge interest only on money. It charges interest on neglect, on silence, on vagueness, on avoidance, on inconsistency. So, if this video hit hard, good. That means some part of you already knows what needs attention. Do not numb that. Do not turn it into another moment of awareness with no follow-through. Use it. Pick one thing. Fix it while it is still fixable at this price. That is the move. Not shame, not panic. Action. Because regret usually doesn't arrive like a storm. It arrives like recognition. A quiet moment where you suddenly understand that the thing you kept delaying has been shaping your life the whole time. Do not wait for that moment to get louder. Move while the truth is still early. So here's the real question. Which one of these 7 hit you the hardest? Health? Money? Career? Relationships? Boundaries? Direction? Or inconsistency? Drop it in the comments. And don't just name it. Say the first thing you're going to do about it. Not someday. First. Because people do not change when they understand more. They change when they act while the truth is still uncomfortable. If this gave you clarity, like the video, subscribe, and stay here. Because this channel is about building a stronger life before delay turns every lesson into regret.